Hello, I'm Brian Balke of Hypnosis Rising, and welcome back to our introduction to Histotherapy. In our series on therapeutic strategy, our theme is empowerment of clients to own their fulfillment. They come to us frustrated with their inability to change. We therefore began this series with the challenge of persuasion for agency. How do we convince the client that they can change? Our second lecture surveyed the landscape of personality, providing us with perspectives that help the client orient themselves for rebalancing of their mental faculties. Our third lecture introduced narratives that help the client understand the social challenges that instill self-limiting behaviors. These insights will be joined with therapeutic strategies in our application lectures. At the end of our last lecture, we exposed the paradox between self-improvement and social integration. At the root of our personality, in networks established in infancy, we know that we are dependent upon other people. This creates pressure to conform with the standards and expectations of our community. If that is insupportable for us, then we must change ourselves, change the standards of our community, or seek greener pastures. This means that personal fulfillment requires that we understand the expectations of our community. In facilitating this resolution, Christotherapists are constrained by the scope of our practice. We know the social context only through the testimony of our client. That testimony is naturally biased, but also limited by the maturity of their social intelligence. Are they focused on what is done, what they feel emotionally, or on moral considerations? In fact, our therapeutic constraints encourage the client to use their rationality to step outside of their experience. The insights of our lecture on the landscape of personality inform this exploration. Still, we need a narrative that frames this growth. Our last lecture offered the stages of development, but that narrative focused on outcomes. It did not characterize the inner growth that occurs in each crisis. How do our patterns of behavior change as we mature? We know that our neural networks refine through use, which leads us to lean into our strengths. At some point, though, the undeveloped networks represent a dependency that others may exploit. Under what conditions are we able to balance our minds? This, in fact, is what clients pay us to provide, conditions under which growth is possible. Such growth is the challenge of mental integration. In this lecture, we introduce a narrative that focuses on broad relationship patterns, on roles and concerns that chart a course toward personal maturity. In therapy, this narrative offers a flexibility that allows the client to celebrate and build upon their strengths. In facilitating balance among the dichotomies of personality, it offers both and rather than either or. Our narrative, the Hristic Path, integrates modern psychology with ancient wisdom. Through that integration, it also leads clients gracefully into spiritual experience. Rather than waiting for enlightenment, the Hristic Path explains the dependencies for spiritual acceptance, allowing clients to work systematically to tap into energies that support and sustain loving partnerships. Let's remember where we sit in our development of therapeutic strategy. We remain focused on the second means for learning socially responsible behaviors, stories. The framework that follows facilitates the client's diagnosis of their expectations for themselves. Through the framework, they also get a narrative that redeems their journey with meaning, hope, and strength. These insights inform our trance work. Recognize that our theory of mind is also a fertile narrative for the client's relationship with themselves. As Christotherapy is self-improvement, we hold the TOM to be an essential element of therapy. The Hristic Path deepens the TOM without contradictions. For this reason, it is our preferred narrative. Having completed our survey of the elements necessary to organize growth toward responsiveness, our next lecture will turn to facilitation, how we structure dialogue and trance work to catalyze change. The title of this narrative, Hristic Path, alludes to the Greek term Christos. To fully appreciate the ambitions we inspire, a brief tour of Hellenismos, the ancient Greek religion, is helpful. Hellenismos was an attempt to develop a more effective orientation to reality. It originated in an era of transition from tribal to urban cultures. In such transitions, each tribe attempts to assert its culture. Normally that contest results in consolidation, but that was prevented in ancient Greece by geography. Nonetheless, united by a common language, the Greeks had the opportunity to analyze the benefits of the different forms of social organization. In this dialogue, philosophers recognized that nature applied adaptive pressure that was mimicked by social systems. The first gods, the Titans, predated Greek culture and were affiliated with fundamental cosmic powers, time, substance, and creativity, for example. The Olympians, the active Greek gods during the era, subdued and supplanted the Titans, but manifested many human characteristics, petty jealousy and indulgence of lusts among them. Each Greek city-state adopted patron gods. The ancient Olympics were one way of testing their virtues. Alongside the athletic competitions, philosophers and priests would gather to debate the virtues of their gods. By the time of Plato, the philosophers had concluded that humans should aspire to free themselves from the petty struggles of the gods. They conceived of a third era of religion in which humans would interact directly with the principles of reality. The leader of that movement was termed Christos, the Anointed One or Chosen One. The Greeks assigned this ambition to Dionysius, whom we think of as the party god, but accepted Jesus as a replacement. In India, Buddhists celebrate their avatar as enlightened and believe that others can manifest that quality. To avoid the Christian overtones of Christos, I prefer the Buddhist enlightened one. In Christotherapy, the illumination of enlightenment turns inwards. The Hristic Path further emphasizes that our enlightenment will be incomplete unless others bear witness to our character. As we will see, such witness is mutual and demands maturity from both partners. Let's recognize from the beginning that the Hristic Path is in part a synthesis of prior wisdom. The most ancient antecedent originating in India is the Vedic chakras. This is a 7-step sequence that activates energy centers in the body. The modern statement of the chakras is couched in mysticism. The energies are held to be gateways to fundamental aspects of reality, empowering us to overcome human limitations to achieve fulfillment. In fact, the sequence represents a natural focus for engagement of the world from infancy to adulthood. Until we learn to crawl, stand, and walk, our choices are severely constrained. The root chakra, where the spine meets the hips, represents the problem of locomotion. The second chakra is the center of our most immediate sources of pleasure, the genitals, and irritation, bodily waste. At the 6th stage, the practitioner reviews the childhood reactions to the habits of early life and tunes them as adult responses. The Hristic Path adds the concepts of sociability and nurturance to facilitate navigation of relationships. As in Mayavada Buddhism, relationships are seen as essential to spiritual awakening. In fact, the reason for undertaking chakra work as an adult is because childish reactions limit our social fulfillment. Secondly, I highlight Erikson's stages of development as a modern antecedent, but this properly should be understood as developmental psychology as a whole. Erikson's sequence was derived from observation, and his reasoning was often driven by social conventions. Psychology now understands that social conventions reflect the development of the brain. Our expectations of children correspond to their latent capacities. The Hristic Path draws upon those insights. The Hristic Path also introduces concepts of maturity and complementarity that allow us to navigate the shoals of early adulthood, when our first intimate relationships force us to recognize that the habits of childhood must be reconsidered. As regards both of these antecedents, the Hristic Path recognizes the division of the mind as a central developmental concern. The division is essential to formation of our identity, but our ambition should be to heal the division. These themes are raised in our theory of mind, which focused on the structure of the mind. The Hristic Path can be seen as a restatement that focuses on behaviors and attitudes. This chart summarizes the Hristic Path, an integrated framework that charts growth into spiritual maturity. We will see that spiritual maturity contains social maturity, but hold that thought. Like the chakras, the sequence rises from bottom to top. At each stage, a principal concern is indicated in black and a focal role in gold. At the core of psychology is moderation of socially disruptive behaviors. This biases talk therapy toward the social and physical realms of experience. Spirituality, which is inherently subjective, is typically ignored or even suppressed. As spirituality is the negotiation of the boundaries between I and we, the framework also tracks social and physical maturity. In doing so, we expand our view of maturity as a progression of concerns and roles. As in the stages of development, the earliest roles are concerned with self-differentiation and self-expression. The pivot is in the fourth step, where we are forced to accept that fulfillment arises only in mutuality and set out to address our psychological imbalance and wounds. In the last three steps, we foster the evolution of a community in collaboration with partners that complement our perspectives. Implicit in the progression is the division of the mind at the exit from dependency and its reintegration as a condition of liberation. In the intermediate steps, the methods and focus of Christotherapy adapt to the maturity of the client. Of note, then, is that Christotherapy offers a systematic approach to spiritual growth, where Vedism attends a spontaneous awakening. The structure of the Hristic Path is developed fully in your reading materials. For now, as with the stages of development, we'll concentrate on the psychological principles that drive the progression. In the first step, a dependent is concerned with survival. We speak of survival broadly as a concern encompassing both body and personality. Concerning the stability of the personality, the division of the mind is an essential defense. Exiting this step, we are no longer continuously frustrated by physical limitations, spending rather most of our day developing skills and cultivating relationships. Dependency spans the first four stages of development. Challenges on this step include neglect and schedule overload. Both limit the choices essential to emotional awareness. If social boundaries are indistinct, the child can avoid division of the mind. My sense is that ADHD is potentially a symptom of the mind's attempt to stave off division. If the child never accepts the structure of the classroom, they may enter adulthood without the protection of the critical mind. Finally, adverse childhood experiences signal to the child that their I is impotent, aborting its development. In the second step, the second great biological driver asserts itself, where survival is driven by discomfort. Sex motivates us with pleasure. Our bodies approach adult strength, but in most cultures, our parents continue to protect us from the consequences of our mistakes. The tendency is thus toward hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure in all areas of life. Hedonism includes the fifth stage of development and carries over into the sixth. We seek to corral the sex drive by forming a stable romantic partnership. Unfortunately, we naively assume that lovers should be friends, people like us, rather than complementary to our nature. Our initial pairings generate adventurous competition or protective frustration. Rather than softening into integration, our internal mental divisions harden. We continue to develop skills, but shift the locus of reward from parents to peers. This is not just a social pressure. The hormones that activate sexuality also reorganize the brain. Ineffectual neurons are eliminated to allow us to focus on refinement of existing behaviors. The sleep schedule often slips forward 3 hours, leaving us 2 hours at the end of the day to socialize without parental supervision. Sexual drive and psychological disposition drive us to differentiate for competitive advantage over our peers. Challenges in this stage reflect our resistance to external regulation. We may become lost in fantasy, something actively stimulated first by advertising and now by social media platforms. If we lack mature counselors, we struggle to manage relationship crises, often leaving a residue of trauma. Forming a household demands fiscal self-sufficiency, turning our attention toward value exchange. We become more judicious consumers in our pursuit of pleasure and shrewd in trading our gifts with others. Failed romantic involvements teach us the importance of complementarity, the green cycle. The adventurer discovers resources and opportunities for the protector to harvest and exploit. We find ourselves drifting into complementary pairings, balancing adventurous and protective perspectives. Unfortunately, in crisis, the red loops, each side asserts its strategies. The adventurer wants to find new resources while the protector insists on hunkering down. This paralysis amplifies the crisis, and the adventurer feels rejected while the protector feels guilt. The tension can tear the relationship apart. Even in the lack of external crisis, the protector slowly takes control of the community's resources, suffocating the adventurer's spontaneity. The adventurer loses the decisive luster that drew the protector into the relationship. The protector may seek to collect shiny new partners, frequently in the workplace where emotions are repressed. The same dynamic arises in business partnerships. In entering this step, youth are exposed to exploitation by more experienced consumers. This can breed cynicism that undermines mutually beneficial alliances. This step may span the last 3 stages of development. Finally, confronted with the realization that we are the only factor uniting our crises, we mature into the suspicion that we cannot find relief unless we seek relief for others. Rather than using intimacy as a tool for control, we lean into the healer's role, often as a solitary act of courage. We choose not to dwell on the transgressions of others, recognizing that only serves to drive the wounds deeper, but soften our hearts so that we may be sensitive to and encourage acts of nurturance. This shift into nurturance often begins with child rearing. Remember, where sociability seeks to create opportunities for the self, nurturance develops opportunities for another. Fortunately, success in parenting extends naturally into our other partnerships. In the more mature context, the virtues of complementarity are powerful. A protector systematically learns from crisis, developing hardiness against future repetitions. An adventurer sustains a web of relationships that bring emotional and practical resources, providing resilience against the unexpected. In combination, these are powerful tools for navigating intimate crisis. In fact, as difficulties are resolved, the spark that lit the relationship rekindles, inspiring hopes for lasting contentment. As spirituality is the negotiation of matters between I and we, the healer's role begins the journey into spirituality. When our partners join us in the work of healing, a foundation of trust is laid that allows shallow youth to expand into spiritual maturity. This will come into focus in the last 2 steps. Confident of support, we commit ourselves to partnership. Open, honest communication is key. The relationship matures beyond complementarity towards cohesion. Since we are no longer constrained by resistance, change beckons to us and growth occurs more rapidly. To sustain the alignment of our journeys, we must declare our intentions and govern them with compacts that ensure each partner finds fulfillment. When this occurs, the surrounding community leans into reliance on the partnership. In the relationship with the self, commitment to the truth clarifies our inner landscape. The subconscious no longer need prepare contingencies against mortifying duplicity. As inner barriers soften, we bring more of ourselves to our collaborations. In the Culture Code, Dan Coyle identifies 3 elements essential to successful partnerships: safety, communication, and adaptive patterns. The presence of these elements allow us to sustain trance, instilling a deep identification of the self with the partnership, another aspect of the cohesion described earlier. The challenges to expression of partnership are the hesitancy to reveal the wreckage of past traumas and the realization, often in subordinate partners, that the expectations of partnership established in the past present painful barriers to future growth. Having gone along to get along, they may be unable to envision fulfillment when yoked to the success of their partner. When separation becomes combat, the trauma often drives regression to earlier steps. In the negotiations of partnership, we open vistas into our partner's personality, revealing contrasts that teach us how to balance our mental dichotomies. In other words, our behaviors are no longer bound by the expectations instilled by parents and society. We become innovators, entering an epoch of behavioral creativity in which we adapt to the moral demands of a situation rather than trying to motivate others to compensate for our limitations. Take a moment with that last concept. All prior steps are driven by the need to motivate others to compensate for our limitations, which always generates resistance. For those seeking contentment and peace, they must mature into the innovator's role. Spiritual experience snowballs in this stage. As our personalities meld, we begin to share dreams in the most literal sense. Compassion deepens into a palpable awareness of discomfort and suffering in our midst. Communities given over to these sensibilities hold harmony to be as important as security. Attrition is a serious challenge to harmony. This may be exhaustion of resources such as money or farmland, or gaps in the social web left by departures and death. These problems are amenable to conscientious stewardship. More difficult is the presence of loose cannons, often youth brought into the spiritual gestalt before learning the disciplines of partnership. Parental protection and defensiveness may allow the discord to take root and spread, deeply harming the community. For this reason, early human cultures invented rites of passage that confronted youth with humbling vulnerability. In the moral bastion of a supportive community, our critical minds can dissolve gracefully, allowing the two realms of mind to reunite. This does not just change our relationship to the self. It makes apprehensible perceptions that previously were buried in the subconscious. Our perceptions become vivid and immersive. In awe, the new signs of everyday wonder and how it can transform your life. Dr. Keltner scratches at the surface of this experience. Reigning theories of physics and psychology reject this experience. Their authority inhibits exploration of the principles that secure our participation in encounters with intimidating personalities and forces. For those committed to the journey, Christotherapy echoes the simple truth offered by all the world's great religious avatars. Love is the answer. How to express the side effects? Consider Buddha under the Bodhi tree, or St. Francis preaching to the birds. Is this insanity or genius? Let me share my experience. Our dreams expand into the realm of ideas and begin to resonate with sympathetic intentions in other dimensions of reality. Our subconscious draws the conscious into the dialogue, which takes on the character of influencing reality for the manifestation of our intentions. Time and space become permeable to our awareness. Incidentally, in waking life, associates who are beset by fearful expectations encounter liberating options. Elaboration of those possibilities continues in dreams. The greatest challenge in the end is regression into materiality. Reality and immature dreams blow against us continually. Buildings and possessions appear to be anchors against that wind. Used to receiving material compensation for our work, we demand payment that can be converted to bulwarks that shield us from spiritual experience. In the end, however, compensation is an acceptance of responsibility for work that the customer can only do for themselves. These claims follow us and pollute our refuge. In the end, the only refuge is found in love. But that is religion, not therapy. All the mature therapist can do is make introductions. To force entry to the sacred presence unleashes powerful spiritual antibodies that can take years to placate. It's not worth it to try to do it for somebody else. As with stages of development, your understanding of the Hristic Path will develop in struggles with therapeutic stasis. When a client becomes resistant, they are trapped in denial or assimilation. We then turn to our narrative frameworks, looking for a perspective that will stimulate confrontation and facilitate accommodation. As with the stages of development, the Hristic Path is diagnostic. The client's goals will correspond to the perspective of one of the roles. Until liberation, the roles are self-limiting. We facilitate a resolution by introducing the perspectives of the next role, providing a conceptual framework that the client uses to organize moral and spiritual growth. While we frame it here as a natural progression, each role encapsulates a set of expectations with supporting behaviors. Progression is driven by crisis, either resistance from peers or criticism from more mature witnesses. In subscribing to the Hristic Path, clients gain a strategy that builds reliably to spiritual maturity. To emphasize, the stages of development are comfortable for materialists. For the spiritually sensitive, we offer the Hristic Path. In today's lecture, we cover the Hristic Path, a narrative framework that guides activation and integration of the capacities of our personalities. The possibilities are endless, and in elaborating those possibilities, your understanding may be somewhat diffuse. Let's conclude with a thumbnail sketch. Upon birth, we focus our development for survival. This establishes behavioral foundations that channel our sexual and economic activities. We commit to collaboration only when we realize that those patterns impose inescapable limitations. Sustainable collaboration requires immersion in spiritual experience. In its final stages, material reality is revealed as a metaphor for a spiritual struggle that can be resolved only by allowing love to govern our expectations, dreams, and intentions. Paradoxically, the endpoint of the Hristic Path lies beyond the scope of Christotherapy. Even managing the side effects of earlier spiritual awakening involves advanced methods that we will cover only at the end of your training. So we'll leave these lofty heights and turn in our last lecture in this series to the structure of trance work.